Saying the Fallout series was influential on the gaming space is an understatement on par with saying that humans have had an influence on the planet. The games hold a special place in many a gamer's heart, including my own. Fallout 3 is still quite good. A little rough around the edges, but it still provided a fun world to get lost in for hours and some genuinely memorable quests, characters and themes. Fallout New Vegas is still really good, a lot rough around the edges, but basically taking everything Fallout 3 did in terms of story, equipment and characters and then just doing them all better. It had interesting political themes and in my humblest of opinions some of the best DLC packs of any video game ever. Fallout 4 is fine. It's fine, it's an accessible and reasonably competent RPG, though it does drop the ball when it comes to storytelling, motivation and memorability, at least until Far Harbor released and said, look, I'm Fallout 4 and I can do better, and then Fallout 76 happened and I prefer not to draw attention to it. Look, I know Fallout 76 is more akin to a real Fallout game these days, but its launch was so disastrous and it was initially such a moronic concept with its utter failure to include real characters, towns or any reason to immerse yourself into its world that I really don't care what it became. It fucked up that first impression so badly and now I find myself avoiding it out of spite. Also, it's a live service title and I have more desire to chug the contents of Nigel Farage's mouldy old toilet than I do to stick with such a game model. I've not played the 2D Fallouts, but I will eventually. They do look really good, I just keep putting it off. Still, they had an impact on gaming and that's what the point of this bit was. The post-nuclear, post-apocalyptic RPGs seem to have become more embraced following the success of the Fallout series and I, as a connoisseur of such worlds, couldn't be happier. If there is one main complaint I have about the Fallout franchise is that it's American. Ew, I don't want to play a post-nuclear wasteland RPG game set in the dreadful nightmare hellscape of the USA. I'm British, I want to play a post-nuclear wasteland RPG set in the dreadful nightmare hellscape of Great Britain. I'm just saying, the potential is here, and come on game devs, we're also obese, useless and xenophobic. We're not so different, you and I. It's just that we managed to get really fat on the blandest, most uninspired food known to the world. That's gotta count for something. That took real commitment. No, but in all seriousness, as much as games set in the US can be fun, I want to see my little island filtered through the same lenses and see how our differing cultures might influence the end result of the product. It's why I gave We Happy Few so many chances, because I really wanted to exist in the old history post-war Britain video game world, despite the fact that it was so utterly dreadful. So I have a question. Is Atomfall a true British alternative to Fallout? Or is this an entity of its own that can effectively be judged as its own thing without needing to rely on a comparison? The latter, it's the latter. Still, let's explore why it's the latter. I welcome you, my friends, enemies and all miscellaneous entities, to this month's review. Today we grab a nice cuppa and put on our finest bowler hats as we take a little trip to the UK to discuss Atomfall. We'll have a gander at the mechanics, a pop at the story, and discuss what it does right and what it buggers up. You know, what I literally do every time I make a video game review. I probably don't need to keep outlining this, but I feel weird if I don't. Be sure to do the YouTube thingies if you end up liking this rambling nonsense. Hit that like button like the naughty little bottom that it is, sub for more, leave a comment if you feel so inclined, and also I have an Patreon. Ta-da! And an Discord. Ta-da! If you want to support the channel or just hang out, I'm Breezy. And both will be linked below in the description and in a pinned comment if I remember to do the comment thing. I might, we'll see. Now then, let's have a proper gander at Atomfall, shall we, Gov'ner? Fish and chips, football, down the pub, all that stuff. Britishness. Atomfall isn't a bad game. It's also certainly not a very good game. It practically falls right in the middle of the very notion of quality, as for every selling point or strength it flexes, it has, I feel, at least one counter or potential deal breaker that drag it back down. Some of them are even the same counter, since certain bad game design choices are so significant that they impact the game on a wider scale. It's a strange mess, Atomfall. My sessions with the game were very inconsistent. Sometimes I'd boot it up and only get about 10 or 20 minutes done, because when the game doesn't play to its strengths, it's an absolute drag, but when it does find that biting point, when it starts firing at all cylinders, it's quite good, and my sessions could easily come closer to 3 hours a pop. I will state as clearly as possible that I don't hate the game or think it's completely irredeemable. It's just not all that good for a fairly large portion of the time, and depending on your personal tolerance for generally mediocre experiences, you might find a reason to avoid the game, or it could be exactly the middle of the shelf experience that you'd want to tide yourself over until something better comes along. Let's talk about it. Firstly, let's focus on the controls and what to expect. There are plenty of the usual suspects. The left stick moves us, the right stick aims the camera, as is tradition. Your crouch with the circle button, you jump with the X button, which is also your interact with things button, so sometimes when you press X, despite the fact that there's clearly an interactable item right in front of you, your character will do a little jump like an idiot, but oh well. You open the inventory menu with the touchpad, which is where you can access all your gear, the various pieces of intel you've found, and the crafting menu. From here you can also assign pieces of gear to your quick select function. To do this, all you have to do is hover over a piece of gear, press triangle, and then one of the directional buttons to assign it to a specific slot. Then all you have to do is close the menu, and you can simply press up, down, left or right on the D-pad to access the assigned goodie. If you have multiple of one of your assigned items, like let's say you've assigned bandages or Molotov cocktails, then using one will keep them assigned until you've depleted the stash. Combat is a fairly straightforward affair. It's the R2 button for all attacks, be they ranged or melee, although if you are using a melee weapon, holding R2 will do a heftier swing, which can be quite handy. Load a gun with the square button, which also lets you check your current ammo with the gun, and you aim by pressing L2. If you have a melee weapon equipped, then holding L2 will get you ready to throw it. The same is true for thrown items like grenades, which is a bit awkward because if you don't aim them first, then all you really do with them is a little bit of a light swipe. But once you get used to it, it's all fairly simple. Pressing L1 will perform a kick to get particularly annoying enemies off of you. I forgot to do this at all points because pressing R1 will do a little bit of a shove, which has the same function. I'm sure the kick probably works better, I just kept forgetting it was even an option when I wasn't in combat. If you need to get somewhere in a hurry, then press L3 and you'll start sprinting, which lasts for quite a while honestly, just not forever. See, there's a sort of stamina mechanic which is presented as a heart rate monitor, which you can find at the bottom right of your screen below your health bar and any current status effect timers. It also increases with physical tasks like climbing or sneaking around when there are enemies nearby, which is a nice enough detail, though I can't tell if anything actually happens if you exert yourself too much. Hold on a second.
Reminder for robotics personnel. Mining operations remain on hiatus until the investigation is completed. If you require access to the workings, speak directly with the inquiry team.
So I tested it. Nothing happens when you overexert yourself. You just sort of get the tunnel vision and that's about it. You can't accidentally give yourself a heart attack, which is good. Like, it's completely good that you can't. I just, the dickhead in me is a little bit mad that you can't accidentally give yourself cardiac arrest. The game would be worse if you could, so it's good, it's provably good that you can't. I'm still unreasonably upset that you can't, but that's my issue though, and I'll work on it. Last but not least, pressing options pauses the game so that you can save, load, quit, or access the options. Most of that will probably sound relatively familiar, or at least expected, but this way I'm being thorough. I want to start on a positive note, so let me talk about the game's art direction before we dive into the mechanics. The game looks really nice. It's got that pseudo-realism look that makes it look similar to a 3D Fallout game, just a lot less ugly. It reminds me a bit of Lords of the Fallen, not to be confused with Lords of the Fallen, in which I said it had a stylized realism. It looks grounded enough, but thanks to some artistic liberties, the more fantastical or sci-fi elements don't look horrendously out of place compared to the humans. What the game gets really right is its environmental detail. This game is simply pleasant to exist within, at least when we're outdoors, because the artist did a really good job of making this little slice of Britain look equal parts beautiful and inviting, as well as unwelcoming and tense. The level of overgrowth we see as the plants reclaim the man-made is a fine reminder of just how impermanent we humans truly are. Nature is taking back this area, and now we're little more than a tourist. We have no real claim to the Earth, we just happen to live on it, and these various ecosystems don't give a shit about our accomplishments. A while ago, in my Darksiders review, I talked about how beautiful I found the destruction of the human world to be, and compared it to the series Life After after people. Here I get a sort of similar feeling. Sure, there are parts of the maps that are still populated and kept relatively livable, but anywhere else is falling apart and being reclaimed by nature because this world belongs to it and it always did. I also want to say the background music that accompanies these strolls through the countryside keep me really on edge. They're not so overly oppressive that I'm afraid to even move, but they keep me in the right headspace to expect danger, which is good because danger is often not particularly far away. The combat music is also really good. I think it captures the urgency and desperation one would feel when trying to survive, but given that I'm not a music critic, I'm barely a video game critic, I can't really offer deeper examinations that won't just amount to me googling some music words to try and fool you into thinking I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'll stick to the simpleton approach. Game music, good. I also want to praise the sound effects in the game in general. The guns have really satisfying clicks and clunks when you load or chamber rounds, and the gunshot sound files are pretty high quality and just loud enough to sell the impact of the shot without being completely deafening. When crafting, we hear different collections of noises based on what we're making, like if you're making bandages, you'll hear tearing of cloth and pouring of alcohol to sterilize it. The heavy metallic clang of the large bunker doors as they force themselves open, the gentle rushing shallow water that forms the area's streams, the fluttering of wings of the birds as they take flight. This is a very well designed game when it comes to art and sound direction. It's one thing to simply make competent assets, but it's another thing entirely to fully understand how the smallest details will sell the illusion of the world that these things are going to be found in. I didn't even realise that each helicopter crash site that you could explore are the same basic asset because it was integrated into the environment so well, and reasonably you could expect military helicopters to be consistent in their design to begin with. Where I feel the visuals fall short is when we're forced to be underground. There are quite a lot of bunkers in Atomfall, and quite a large chunk of the game sort of demands that you spend a lot of time in one of the larger subterranean areas, which I will say aren't poorly made by any stretch of the imagination, but they're a lot less visually appealing, and I did tend to resent the moments where exploring bunkers became necessary because I'd much rather be out in the sunshine. Oh wow, that is really unlike me. I should say though that the devs screwed up by making the weather in the game so pleasant. This is the UK, gosh darn it, we only get like 5 days of sun per year, and half of them are cold. My immersion is shattered, my day is ruined, Atomfall is the worst thing to ever exist ever, go jerk off in a lake, your nan is a toaster. I joke, for real the game looks and sounds quite lovely, and I'd even say that the game's strongest elements are its audio-visual details. Of course though, this sort of praise is on par with me, say, praising the icing on a cake. I'm glad the icing is good. I wouldn't want a cake without it, as it would be a lot worse if this aspect was absent, but it's all surface level. So let's now talk about how the game plays in this gameplay section. I know, I'm surprised too. It only took us like 5 minutes of rambling. The game attempts to offer the player a world in which they can choose how they approach their situations, and it sort of achieves this, just not quite as well as it could. As far as the various quests you can take on go, there is usually some variety to how a task can be handled, and let's do this through the medium of example. One quest that you can find for yourself quite early on takes place in Wyndham Village, which is basically the only settlement left that isn't run by outlaws. The leader of the local military presence who protect the town has reason to suspect that the baker is up to no good and wants us, an outsider, to go in and see what we can discover because she really doesn't trust the soldiers. Spoiler alert for this quest, but the thing that she's hiding is the fact that her husband is completely sick with this nasty mushroom infection that drives people to be violent and crazy. The path to discovering the husband's condition is rather linear, and I think there's only a couple of ways that you can do it, but once you do discover this, there's a few ways you can handle things. You can simply kill the husband and then the baker because she'll be understandably upset that you've just murdered her husband and will want to bash your head in. You can report her to the soldiers and get her arrested, and I guess the husband is probably going to be killed in that scenario. Or you can agree to help keep her secret and even find medicine to keep the husband stable, which is definitely the longest, most pain in the arse option, but it's also the option that guarantees you won't lose one of the game's merchants. Not that the game is particularly short on those, I think every other character is a merchant. There's 3 ways to go, 2 considerably easier, but both of them result in the loss of a shop, the distrust of the village locals, and the adoration of the local military. The 3rd way is by far the most interesting, and it naturally prompts you to visit an area you'd otherwise be advised to avoid, which can lead to you getting some better equipment and access to more merchants, but of course it's the hardest option. The bigger quests and some of the smaller ones do tend to follow this approach, which is a good thing, although most of the leads you can follow outside of these are just simple scavenger hunts, with the biggest decision you have to make being, do I kill the enemies or do I use stealth to avoid them? Or in reality, do we kill all the enemies immediately or do we kill them slightly later when the stealth inevitably fails? Stealth in this game just really isn't very good, and it's for a combination of reasons. Firstly, we have the Horizon Zero Dawn problem where there's only one type of grass that can be used to effectively conceal our bodies in, and that's obviously not an option for a lot of the man-made interiors that have no no exposure to sunlight. Secondly, the takedown mechanic is overly long and way too loud by default, so unless you're dealing with only one or maybe two enemies at most, it's best not to bother. Thirdly, the game's AI really isn't built for this approach. I've been spotted by enemies through solid walls because the AI wasn't programmed to see the object between me and them. And fourth, most enemy groups are 4 or more strong, and whilst they are spread out, there's usually 2 or more keeping an eye out for danger, and they're rarely in a position which is accessible for a takedown, and even if you do the takedown, you're now revealing yourself to a room full of gun-toting psychopaths, who are understandably upset that you just killed one of their friends. Also, given the game's setup, it's entirely possible to miss the skill books that allow you to unlock the ability to learn perks that increase the damage you deal to unaware enemies, and the one that reduces the takedown noise in the first place. So stealth is often not viable for anything aside from scoping out an area, and even then, it's not great for that. Now look, you can use the stealth to get to a vantage point to start sniping or to throw an explosive to clear out some enemies, so it's not completely useless. But once you've done either of these, the enemy troop will now be onto you like semen onto your dad's chin. It's fine for giving yourself a leg up, it works to allow you to plan out your assault before you commit, but in my time playing the game, there was rarely a chance to do a proper stealthy clear out of an area, and more to the point, it was always just way easier to go in guns blazing. Not every enemy has a firearm, not all enemies with firearms have good firearms, and most human enemies will die in a single volley to the head. They don't move around a whole lot, so lining up your shots isn't particularly difficult, and if your target happens to have a melee weapon equipped, then they'll usually hesitate to charge a mute lunatic with a rifle who's aiming said rifle at their face. This ties into how the game wants you to approach combat encounters. See, when you're out in the open, avoiding combat is usually a better idea. There's plenty of space for you and the various outlaws and druids to coexist, and you'll often get a verbal warning from the group if you get too close for their comfort. If you've not got a weapon drawn, they also seem more forgiving and willing to let you just walk away. Quite frankly, I love this little detail. It's a very live and let live approach that highlights what the game was trying to be. It wants you to weigh the risks of going into battle and know that you cannot engage if you don't want to. The problem for me is this only really works outdoors. Inside spaces that you need to search for story things, I found it was always easier to mow down the room full of goons, so I could then loot the area in peace. Inside enclosed spaces, there's fewer places to hide to avoid a firefight, and it's often just not worth the effort. Again, if you're going up against humans, which you most likely will be, a single bullet to the skull is almost always fatal unless they're wearing a helmet. Also, most of them will die to like 2 or 3 melee attacks a pop, which isn't as hard to do as you might think it is, since unlike you, enemies haven't learned the secret technique to victory in close combat. You just step backward when an enemy swings at you. Then, whilst they're open, do a heavy attack to the vague region their head occupies, and ta-da! It's quick, easy, and works like a charm. The feral zombie things look kinda worrying at first, and they hit like runaway star destroyers, so you might think best to use guns. But then you realise their melee behaviour isn't really all that different to irregular outlaws. They don't move amazingly fast, they leave themselves open stupidly easily, they can't or won't actively dodge your attacks, and it doesn't even take that much more effort to kill one. The only thing melee isn't a good idea against is the giant robots, because their weak point is too high off the ground so you won't be able to hit it, and they can kill you in seconds. You might be thinking, oh, so they're actually hard, right? No, not really. They have a very big, obvious, easily shootable weak point right at the top of them, and if you cause too much damage to this place, they have to stop and vent heat for a really long time, a time in which they're unable to retaliate to anything you're doing. And by too much damage, I mean like 4 or 5 bullets to the head is about all it takes. To defeat the robot, now all you have to do is walk up behind it and pull the battery out like you're playing Titanfall, and boom, it shuts down. It kinda highlights a problem that Atomfall has, in that most of its enemies are really only threatening before you realise how simple dealing with the problem really is. The gunplay itself isn't all that bad. The guns have a good weight and sense of impact to their shots, though it is a bit awkward since you can't really strafe from left to right when you're doing your shooting. It's more about finding a safe space to attack from than boomer shootering your way through a situation. The combat feels quite harsh at first, but when you adjust your gears for the pace and approach the game is expecting of you, it loses the tension and raw panic it initially offers, and goes from being avoid all combat when possible to might as well gun everyone down to save time and effort. I can see what the game was aiming for, and the target wasn't a bad one to have, it just didn't quite land the shot. One of the issues I have with the guns in Atomfall is that they're so prevalent it makes them not feel special. I would have thought that part of the charm of using the UK as a setting is that we've got stricter gun control laws, so a post-apocalypse game would probably have to favour melee over ranged engagements, or at the very least we'd have to make do with more improvised ranged weapons when facing anyone outside of military personnel, but that's not really what happened. By the way, I'm not saying that we don't have any guns over here at all, it's just you can't go to your local supermarket and walk out with a high school's worth of firepower. We have more knife-related crimes than anything. I mean, sure, it's still bad, but at least you can't kill 19 people from half a postcode away. You have to put the effort in to be a psychopath over here and really get your steps in if you want to do your killing. See, Britain is superior because our serial killers are more active. Wait, hold on. I just feel like there was a bit of a trick missed is all. I feel like the guns should be rarer given how overpowered they can make a character feel. If you have a gun and some bullets, then you're already set to handle 99% of all combat situations that Atomfall can throw at you. There is a rather harsh limit on how big each pile of bullets that you can carry with you at a time is, but then again it's hardly a problem because ammo is common almost to a fault. You find it bloody everywhere. It was definitely the most common loot item I happened to discover, so the game doesn't even have the sense to properly withhold the thing that fucks with the balance. You're basically free to be Lord Death of Murder Mountain. Again, robots are the biggest consistent combat threat to you, and you really don't need that many bullets to put one down. I think a close second has to be the automated gun turrets because they can put out a lot of damage in a very short amount of time, but they can be very easily snuck up on. They're about the only thing in the game that stealth works against more often than it doesn't. And early into the game, you're given a device that hacks turrets with a single press of a button. I think the only big thing to be concerned about in combat is just how fragile your character is by default. I think like 3 or 4 bullets is enough to end your suffering, but most firearm-wielding enemies take a pause before shooting you, and they also verbally let you know that they're aiming at you. The combat of Atomfall is a very mixed bag. It's clearly trying to be a setup where you need to carefully prep yourself before you engage, but after the first 90 minutes of gameplay, I had a rifle, a pistol, a shotgun, and plenty of ammo for all 3. The guns themselves feel fine to use, they are weighty and relatively satisfying, but they also trivialise combat so much that it makes even the recommended survival difficulty feel quite easy. All you have to do is make sure you can take cover and you'll usually be okay, and even then that's not always necessary because most enemies aren't actually that good a shot. The game doesn't have bad combat, it's more that it just has unbalanced combat that's often far less dangerous to engage with than I feel the game really wants it to be. Yes, when I first started playing, the general weight of our character and initial scarcity of ammo made me hesitant to go on the hunt, but only a short while later you might as well have called me Slaughter-Ronica Goddess of Death, because I was killing more Brits than the fucking plague. It's not an unfun setup. Pardon me. Sorry, that snuck up on me a bit. It's not an unfun setup by any means, it's just a much more toothless one than you'd probably expect from a game that clearly wants you to weigh the pros and cons of engaging in open hostilities. If a little inconsistency in desired approach versus useful approach was all I had to criticise, then the game probably wouldn't nearly be anywhere near as much of a mixed bag as it is. Sadly, there are several other problems I'd like to bring up that do make the game harder to enjoy. First and foremost, the goddamn inventory limit. Your inventory is divided into 3 categories of items. You have your crafting resources. Each stack of parts has a limit of about 20, if I can recall correctly, to take up an unseen space. Then you have your 12 primary spaces for small objects. This is where you store things like handguns, Molotov cocktails, Cornish pasties, and bandages. And I'm going to tell you right now, items do not stack, so each individual bandage you want to carry is going to take up a space. I should also mention that I couldn't find any way to increase the amount of space we have to work with. It looks like you start with 12 slots and are going to end with 12 slots. It's a very old feeling approach to inventory management, and it was a constant fucking annoyance as I played the game. It also just didn't make a whole lot of sense half the time. In what world does a single bandage take up the same space as a full first aid kit? How is it that one of these giant atomic batteries takes up the same space in my backpack as a sheet of paper? I can suspend my disbelief to an extent, but this approach feels either lazy or moronic. And your third inventory section, this is for your big weapons like your two-handed melee tools, or the rifle grip guns like shotguns or snipers. You have 4 of these slots, which isn't too bad at first, but it becomes much more of a pain later on when you actually unlock the ability to upgrade your guns so they're not all rusty pieces of shit, because all the recipes call for at least 2 of the previous version of the gun to put together. On paper, I get why this was done. The game strives to be a rather brutal experience, and it wants the player to have to weigh up the pros and cons of what they carry versus what they leave behind. That way they can't become too powerful, but the funny thing about this is it didn't fucking work. It just makes the entire experience feel more like a chore. Hey, do you want to hear a phrase that I've said quite a lot whilst playing this game? Oh fuck me, my pockets are all full again. I'd better find one of those pneumatic tubes to store my excess shite. Luckily, most bunkers or places of importance will have at least one of these to work with, so it sounds good, right? Being able to store away your excess stuff so you don't have to lug it around. It sure is, on paper. The problem is, Atomfall isn't run on paper, so it's also bad. It has a 100 item limit, there's no way I could find to increase this limit, and like your inventory, every item takes up a single slot. You can't stack any of it. So every single pasty or bandage that you want to store now takes up the same real estate as a Lee Enfield rifle, and I have to call shenanigans on that. It's a rather unforgiving system to its own detriment. Like with the combat, I can see what it was aiming for, but again, it misses the mark, largely because of how the combat missed the mark in the first place, and the inventory didn't want to look too good in front of its friends, so it also intentionally missed. Personally, I think that if an inventory limit is absolutely necessary for a video game, not that it often is, but let's just grant that for Atomfall it is, just for the sake of this. I'd prefer to have a more Fallout-akin system where it's weight-based rather than object-based. I don't know why that one feels less annoying to me, it just does. It still requires a suspension of disbelief for sure, but for some reason it feels less arbitrary than having to make do with 12 pockets that can each hold a single item. I dislike the inventory system in Atomfall, it's bad. Now let's try and talk about something good. We'll go for the game's areas. I love the game's environments and just how beautiful and dense each area feels, with a ton of gear to find, locations to explore, and often plenty of lore-heavy collectibles to fill you in on the lives of the people that call this region home, or at least once did, since most of them are dead. The game's world is wonderfully explorable and always rewarded me for pouring through it, but then Atomfall, unable to walk and chew gum at the same time, sort of buggers it all up by failing to include any form of fast travel. The game world isn't overly large, but having to walk back and forth absolutely everywhere got very tiring very fast. If you're a game dev, then please understand that the walk to and from a place isn't particularly fun or engaging on its own. Some games use intricate trick systems and exaggerated physics to make getting around town exciting to a point where the fast travel system that it does include may as well not even exist. Some simply add something like driving to the mix, which adds a layer of challenge for getting where you need to go. Some simply avoid the whole problem entirely by reducing the size of their world so it's not a problem. Atomfall doesn't have anything like this. There's not really anything here to make a return trip fun. I guess there is combat as an option, but a better designed game knows how to integrate the good times into the simple act of getting from A to B, whereas Atomfall just sort of rocks up and says, hey, if you want you can shoot some guys along the way, but they'll leave you alone if you don't want to. Sound good? No, not particularly. There's no driving, no parkour, no anything. We're just walking. Downtime is important to make the bigger moments stick in the story, I understand that, but Atomfall already has plenty of moments where things are nice and quiet. So what does the trip really add? Tedium, I guess. Well, that took a turn into bitchiness real fast, didn't it? Let's try something else. The game has a barter and trade system that completely forgoes currency, which I have to admit is a cool idea as ideas go, and it's not poorly pulled off in some places, especially when we look at how specific merchants value certain items over others. For example, one of the earliest shopkeepers in-game that you can find, her name is Molly by the way, will comment that bandages are stupidly common and not worth much to her, so you won't be able to get as much stuff if you're going to trade them with her. This gives you a reason to seek out other merchants around the world and learn what they do and don't really like so you can get the best deals. Of course, it has its flaws, and most of them are related to the things we've already discussed, by which I mean the inventory limit severely impacts what you can and cannot trade at any given time, and the constant fucking back and forth this requires makes the entire enterprise a pain in the arse. Damn it, we're back to complaining again. I am trying, viewer, I promise. I really am trying to praise the game, but it seems every time I do, I then remember something that annoys me which cancels it out. This is the big issue with Atomfall as a game. It basically perfectly balances itself out to sit right in the centre of the quality scale. For every bit of praise I can offer the game, I feel a qualifying statement or two needs to be made. I like the gunplay, but the prevalence of firearms leads to the game feeling a bit unrewarding. I like the crafting system, that's right, I actually like this crafting system. Yeah, it's not anything special, but it's not poorly implemented. It is, however, hampered by a harsh inventory limit that also worms its way into creating problems elsewhere. I love exploring the game's world, but no fast travel means it always takes longer than it needs to, and the way the game handles sliding is fine until it's not. I'm perfectly fine with our character sliding down a steep hill. I am a lot less happy when a pile of rocks by the roadside all have the same angles as a steep hill and cause our slope detection to have a slight fit. The various large bodies of water that you can go waist deep into are usually leech infested, so you can't stay in for too long without taking damage, and the main water source in the area is fenced off by a knee-high chain because apparently that was easier than trying to sell us a video game where a character couldn't swim, which... no. Like, believe it or not, humans are not natural swimmers. We're really not built for this activity at all. At least half the world has no ability to swim. It's really not that difficult to believe. Just have us drown if we go in too far. This would also have the benefit of making the game world feel a lot less divided than it actually is, because there's a very natural barrier between you getting from one place to another without taking the main path. It's a small issue, I grant, but as I've said before, we should never underestimate the ability of small problems to create larger issues later. Also, crows. Fuck the crows in this game. They are a nuisance. And the rats. Fuck you, Atomfall, you've taken two of my favourite animals and made me hate them. I like that we can drink a nice cup of tea in the main village to completely restore our health. I dislike that each teapot we can find only works once, because this is an absolutely charming detail that deserves to be more available. I like the barter system, but sometimes merchants being willing to accept certain items or displeased with others doesn't always make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm very glad that the torch item and the device that we use to hack turrets don't take up main inventory slots, so we don't have to sacrifice a space for them, but I also think this shows a lack of willingness to commit to the more brutal vision the game had for itself, and it just makes the entire experience feel less sincere. It's neat that we can use a metal detector to find buried treasure. It's less neat that you often won't have the fucking inventory space for any of it. The big robots are cool and dangerous, but they're also upsettingly easy to kill. The fungal zombies are a neat idea, if a little Last of Us for my liking. I do like the art direction for them, but they're barely a threat to a player with a gun, or let's be honest, any real weapon, because their AI is fucking dreadful. The heart rate meter is a fun gimmick, but it doesn't seem to really do anything. I like how Atomfall doesn't have a traditional leveling system, and instead we use these training stimulant items that we find around the map to unlock new perks, but I'm less thrilled that to even have the ability to get some of these perks, we also have to find a training magazine, because it just feels a bit roundabout. Atomfall, on a gameplay level, isn't bad. I can't go that far. It's also not good. I can't go that high. Did I have some fun playing it? Yes, I think I did. Do I still want to play it? No, not even a little bit. Am I angry with it? No, not really. I mean, I threw in some performative rage here and there to punctuate some sentences, but I really don't have any emotional connection to this game at all, so I'm not happy about it either. I've played worse video games than Atomfall. Hell, I've played worse video games than Atomfall this year. I've also played better video games than Atomfall this year, ones that actually made me kind of feel something, or at least stuck in my mind because they had a more interesting art direction. And if you recall, earlier I was praising the art direction of Atomfall. It's definitely good, but it's not memorable. I've been struggling to record this script because it's really hard to want to talk about a game that's the entertainment equivalent of white noise. But then again, I'm determined to get my £50 worth of entertainment out of it somehow, and bitching about it is kind of fun on its own, I won't lie. Atomfall is like frozen yogurt. It's okay, I'd rather be eating ice cream, but it's better than eating a plate of Brussels sprouts. If I was the kind of person who gave games scores, I'd say the gameplay was like a 5 out of 10, like perfectly in the middle, because that's where it balances itself out to be. With all that said, let's now move on to the story section and hope that it's better. Spoiler alert, it's kind of the same, to be honest. Story time.
Hello, stranger. Not saying you were on this stretch before. How do?
Atomfall takes place in the strange fantasy realm of Great Britain, and the fact that we still attach the word great to our country's title is truly the biggest fantasy of them all. It's the 1960s, World War II is sort of potted out by this point, and England is working with nuclear power to push them into the future, which only really seems to take the shape of giant robots, automated gun turrets, and big batteries that power science stuff. Honestly, outside of the setup being used to justify the existence of giant robots, there's not actually a whole lot done for the deeper world of the game outside of the disaster that acts as the catalyst for the events of Atomfall. It's an alternate history setup that doesn't really feel like it takes the idea and runs with it, more just tentatively tugs at the idea's arm, and then when the idea wasn't immediately reciprocative, the game just sort of shrugged and wandered off. There's definitely a premise here, it's just not as well explored as it could be. Long story short, the local nuclear power plant seems to have suffered a type of catastrophic meltdown, which created this weird energy haze over this entire region of England, which in turn prompted the government to seal it off via quarantine to prevent the damage from spreading, and more to the point, try and keep anyone from figuring out what really went down. There's a fair amount going on here. We've got a sort of authoritarian regime of soldiers who too are trapped by the quarantine, but attempt to create a semblance of order and safety with their limited staff and resources. We've got outlaws who live on the outskirts of the village and tend to just sort of potter around scavenging for stuff and sort of pointing their guns at people they don't like but not necessarily shooting them, and there are the druids who are the outlaws with a slightly different theme. They have more of a nature thing going on, and they tend to use bows rather than firearms, and in all likelihood are all infected by the glowing fungus that's causing problems for the region as a whole. The latter two factions don't really do much, nor do they seem to have any significant characters. They're really more of a presence in a physical these guys are here sense, rather than say being an ideological presence. Oh yeah, and there's the glowing fungus from outer space that seems to communicate through spores, so I'll probably bring that up at some point. It's definitely the most interesting entity, although that's not saying a whole lot when it's competing with basic British soldiers and two different flavours of raider gangs. All of this either does or doesn't matter to our protagonist, a faceless, voiceless pleb with no history, names, thoughts, or anything I can even pretend is a character trait. That's right, friends, enemies, and all in between entities, we're in the world of the silent protagonist, and I really mean silent. Like, I don't even recall hearing a death rattle from our camera-faced body. You know, I understand that I'm one to cut slack to this approach, and can even understand why it works sometimes, but I'm getting a bit tired of it, to be completely honest with you. There is absolutely nothing to work with. Our protagonist really doesn't even have the slightest hint at a personality or backstory. We just exist. We are merely the conduit the player uses to interact with the virtual space, and this one doesn't even offer us a consolation prize like character customization or a text-based choose your background approach. We're literally just a prop. So far this year, I've reviewed 4 games, including today's, and 3 of them didn't bother to tell us anything about who we play as. Project Tower presented us with a faceless prisoner with the most basic motivation of not being a prisoner anymore, so that was something, I guess. Lords That Fall and such provided us with a voiceless goober, but at least we got to make them look nice. Not that that's a substitute for real character work, but it was something, and now we're right back to being a faceless, voiceless prisoner who'd rather not be a prisoner. Writers. Please do the fucking work. Give me a character to engage with. I want to know who I'm playing as. I want to hear them react to the world. I want to know who they are. What are their real motivations? Where did they come from? Where will they go? Where did they come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Given that we don't even get to name our character or work on their appearance in any way, shape or form, the fact that we're a silent loser was immediately hard for me to get on board with because it feels like the game just forgot to include something. It's so noticeable as well. We get an intro cutscene that lays out the basics of the world and then bam, we're in a bunker. We're waking up. A science boy is yelling at us. Who are we? Don't know. How'd we get here? No idea. Are we military? Are we science staff? Are we the janitor? Are we a horse fucker escaping from the equine anti-buggery task force? Who knows? Not me. Who cares? Not the writers, that's for sure. Look, I'm not asking for every single detail of my character's life, personality and core belief system, but just something, you know? I felt immediately alienated and found getting invested much harder because we aren't playing as someone who's invested in the world or attached to it in any way, shape or form. We're just a guy with a camera for a face. The era of the silent, character-deficient protagonist feels a lot like the Age of Fire from Dark Souls, in that it desperately needs to hell, it wants to die, but some really uninspired idiots keep kindling the flame even though the world has already begun moving on without them and they're only making it harder for themselves. At least we can still choose dialogue options based on what we want to say in conversation, so it's not all bad, and maybe given the fact that the voice acting in this game is a bit awkward, I should probably be thankful that we're only reading our responses, not saying them. It's just that I'm really tiring of this approach. I want a character, a person, someone I can engage with or feel invested in, and Atomfall fails to provide this, and on top of that doesn't even give us something to sort of balance it out. So, since we have no face, voice, name or real identity outside of probably being a British person given the setting, I choose to believe our protagonist is a walking mince pie with a teapot for a head, and you can't tell me I'm wrong, fuckers. Oh wait, we can see our body. Okay, you can tell me I'm wrong, but please don't tell me I'm wrong. I literally can't handle anything ever. We first awakened in a bunker with no memory of how we got there. A bloke in a yellow chemical suit rushes in telling us that everything is fucked and we need to reach something called the interchange to stop everything being fucked, after first begging us to craft him a bandage to ease a wound he's suffered. By the way, this science boy, yeah, he doesn't know who we are either, and our identity, or lack thereof, never really comes up in a significant way. We are a random fuck now, and destiny says we shall remain so. This first scene does at least do an acceptable job of setting up intrigue. We're fed just enough information to get the idea that something bad has happened, but we're not given all the answers right away because the guy telling us the information is hurt, unfocused, and probably about to die, so he gives us what he thinks we need to progress. We then leave the bunker to step out into the world, and it's quite a pretty sight, all things considered. In the distance, we can see the power plant that's spewing out a haze that keeps this entire region of England cut off from the rest of the world, and I absolutely love this detail. It's visible from all outdoor areas, and given the fact that initially it serves as the reason why we're in quarantine, I think it's really cool that it's so present so often. Once we make it outside, we're greeted by a red telephone booth. Oh yes, we're definitely in Britain, and hold on, the phone is ringing. That's not right, these are more for making calls than receiving them. This sets up a recurring event that I find conceptually more interesting than the ultimate execution. We hear a voice telling us that Oberon must die. We don't know what that means unless the King of the Fairies is actually responsible for what's going on here, although given that tricky fuck I wouldn't put it past him. But then the line goes dead and we're left to wonder what the hell that was all about. The reason that I say that I don't love the execution of this idea is based on a few factors, but the biggest one is definitely the fact that most of the calls are just telling us, "Don't trust character X." And I'm like, yeah, I just met them, they seemed dodgy as fuck, I didn't really need you for this. But also, don't trust character Y. Yeah, again, they were very clearly lying about something, their entire body language and mannerisms told me that. Again, you're not really doing anything. But you should trust me. No. Here's an example. The big army boy in charge of the local military presence in the village, whose name I can't remember right now, so I'm going to call him Captain Crunch, is clearly an authoritarian douchebag who makes life difficult and stressful for the people he's supposed to be protecting. He also literally locks them up for like the slightest thing they do wrong. And the thing is, he tells you like all of this. Later on we meet Dr. Garros, who apparently worked on the power plant across the river that seems to be making everything all fucky, only she's in prison and basically immediately tells us that she won't tell us everything even if we help her escape, but we should still help her escape anyway because she's trustworthy. But then when we do open her cell, she immediately legs it for the interchange and locks the fucking door behind her. The point is, I didn't need to be told that I can't trust any of these clearly untrustworthy people. I would have still chosen to side with one because, let's face it, they're a means to an end, but I really would only be picking the best of a bad situation, and I already knew that. You're not exactly subtle, Atomfall. The phone calls don't allow a sense of unease or distrust to naturally build because they just give you the answer to that question, and that's really all they give you. They don't share actual information with you. You won't learn a lot of real details through them. They just sort of serve to... Actually, I don't really know why they're here. All they really do is tell you to feel things that you probably already feel. Atomfall, be honest with me, is this an idea came first, justification came later situation? What I do like about the phone calls though is that they're not real. As we explore the world, we'll occasionally find notes from people who either heard someone claim that the phone was ringing or heard it ring for themselves, despite the fact that the phone lines were all cut off years ago. So we're hallucinating this effect for some reason, which hints that there is something about our character that might actually be interesting. Maybe there's hope for us, yet no, not really. I'd like to say that the game's plot is at least interesting, but I feel like that would be inaccurate. I think instead I'd be better served saying that the game's world building and lore is rather interesting, and admitting that the actual narrative threads that we follow are largely either plain, predictable, or would have hit a lot harder if we were playing as a real character who we could see react to the events. I can see that the game is trying to achieve a level of depth and complexity in the writing. It sets up these situations where there isn't always a clear-cut good option, which, as a lover of moral ambiguity, I am all for, but I don't think it really nails this as well as it could, because the gameplay and story don't really mesh together all that well, and there's not really a significant reward or punishment for making morally questionable decisions. You have the basic, if you shoot a dude in front of another dude then they won't like you, but that's entry level. The game hints that violence is bad and says that you probably shouldn't do it if you can avoid it, but it never really commits to this thought. What time is it? Example time. Again, there's an old chemist woman who lives in the woods, and she wants us to reclaim a lost book. It was stolen by some druids, but she wants us to avoid killing the druids where possible because she doesn't think that this theft warrants their deaths. But when I went to get the book, I have to pass through their territory, which means I'm going to be trespassing, which I didn't mention in the gameplay section. If you're trespassing and an enemy spots you, they immediately turn hostile. There we go, that's the whole function. And because the game's stealth system is so terrible, it was way easier to just do the violence. I didn't even really feel bad about it because our character doesn't care. Also, the druids tried to kill me first. There's no karma system or anything of the sort, so I'm not convinced that our character's actions actually have consequences. I did try to be peaceful. I walked up to their place with no weapon drawn and they immediately turned hostile. Another example, when I freed Dr. Garros from jail, I understand that he made all the soldiers that were keeping her there very unhappy, but apparently they didn't bother to radio the main village and tell them that the fuck with a camera for a face was not to be trusted because I was able to just walk back into the village like nothing happened. No one seemed to care at all aside from the guards in the immediate prison area, but let's be honest, I don't have any reason to go back there, so it literally doesn't matter. Plus it's worth mentioning that every enemy group I killed along the way respawned later like nothing happened, so clearly the game was using Rise of Skywalker as an inspiration for how actions should affect consequences. The narrative isn't overly amazing to begin with, it's got a cool setup and its world building is quite nice, but the actual plot threads that we follow and story scenes we engage with aren't really anything to write home about. Like, would it really surprise you to learn that Dr. Garros turned out to be even dodgier than we first expected when she actively destroys the research that would tell the world about what happened here? Probably not, right? Given her status as one of the bigwigs of the power plant and her understanding of what Oberon actually means in this game, you're almost certainly supposed to peg that maybe she's not someone that you should leave your guard down around, given that in all likelihood she probably shoulders a not insignificant amount of blame for what happened here. I think where the narrative is concerned, the biggest source of intrigue comes from Site Oberon, which is the initial location where the strange mind-buggering mushrooms were first discovered. Using their spores, they infect and control people, which is a cool idea. Plus, they do play a significant role in the game's later story, but something about how it's all pulled off did leave me feeling a bit blank. It was set up interestingly enough, in fact most of the plot is, but when it comes time to pay off what we're working towards, I feel that Atomfall just kinda stopped trying after a certain point. I can keenly remember most of the quest's setups, where we meet the characters, what they wanted from us, why they needed our help, why we had to go to place X to find object Y, but then most of the plot threads just sort of potter out and don't leave any lasting impression. Most of the characters we meet have like 2 character traits apiece and aren't worth committing to memory. Let me put it like this, I can hardly see anybody anybody wanting to cosplay these characters, given the basic appearances they have and how charisma void they truly are. The game has a total of 3 endings according to Wikipedia, which I saw none of because I ended up giving up right before the end. The main story centres around our apparent desire to escape the quarantine zone, but our utter lack of personality, history, drive or anything makes it really hard to get on board or care. We just have this big IOU where our character is meant to be. The story falls apart because the protagonist just doesn't really exist, our choices don't seem to matter, and most of the big reveals, well, they're either predictable in that the mushrooms are aliens from outer space all along, or they're cliché and predictable. Shocker, the nervous woman we found is also dodgy and untrustworthy and kills people, what a surprise. I think I have to say though that the really big issue with the game's story is that of investment or a lack thereof. No character here feels fun or interesting, most of the quests are just go to a bunker and find a thing. There are a few areas where the game lets you make a real choice that may result in a tangible gameplay benefit, it's just that most of the time in my experience, these benefits were often not worth much. If you remember earlier we discussed a quest where the baker in the village has that whole husband mushroom zombie thing going on, if you end the quest in a way that saves her life then sure, you have an extra merchant that you can now purchase stuff from, but here's the thing, she's not a very good one. She mostly just sells bread and pasties which are available for free all over the fucking place. At one point I was exploring and I did a short quest for a dude I met in a basement. Don't worry, it was nothing creepy, he just wanted scrap metal to repair his gun. But later on I also found a woman who's been looking for the interchange and also needs a way out of the quarantine zone, and she killed him, and I would feel bad, but like, he was barely a character himself. Plus I got a slightly better rifle out of it, so yeah, that happened. I think the point was to try and make this woman look dodgy, but given the fact that she does the obvious fictional character is lying to you thing, come on, you know what I mean. When you're watching TV and you see a character who's clearly lying to another character and we know they're lying, they do this thing where it's like, oh yes, I definitely said this because I was doing that. They have these mannerisms and inflections that make it very obvious that they're full of shit. Yeah, that's what this woman does. She is clearly lying about something, she's obviously trying to cover stuff up, so no, I don't find it hard to believe that she shot this guy, he probably knew what she was doing. In a well-written game I might think, oh I helped this woman earlier, but then this other guy got killed as a result of that, now I feel bad, but like, I just don't feel that for Atomfall. I don't want to say that every single aspect of the game's narrative, every thread or twist or character is completely terrible, because let's be real, that's not the case. They just feel a bit empty. The story of Atomfall on paper is an interesting affair, but when it comes together it feels slow, it lacks the ability to immerse the player, and it just doesn't feel like it's being told with any significant skill. We have a lot of the pieces here for a really solid, deeply compelling narrative, but we're missing some significant elements that the story can technically function without. But as a result of their absence, the whole thing feels bland, uninspired, and just doesn't really present enough of a reason to want to see it through. I've seen worse stories by like a lot, but I've also seen better stories by like a lot. I'd say like with the gameplay, the narrative balances out to being a very middle of the shelf type affair, which can effectively be summed up by saying, yeah, it's alright. If you were to look up mediocre in the dictionary, you'd find a picture of me, but I'd be holding a picture of Atomfall, so there's that. Why do I do this to myself? It's not the best thing that's ever happened, it's not the worst low that gaming has ever seen, it's not superbly competent with just a handful of little errors, it's also not dreadful with only a few saving graces, it's smack bang in the centre of the scale. I think it has more good things than bad things in terms of total number of things, but the bad things are large enough to occupy basically the same total space. The strong exploration is hampered by a bad inventory system and a lack of fast travel. The decent gunplay is hampered by awkward feeling movement and a lack of need to actually engage with it most of the time. Interesting quests are outnumbered by basic scavenger hunts that really aren't memorable. The crafting system isn't bad and doesn't feel out of place this time around, but it too is brought down by the same inventory issues that affect the travel and the looting. Throughout the entire cast of characters, there's only about 3 of them that are actually memorable, they said, not being able to remember like 2 of the 3 names, while the rest fade into the background. The stealth system is janky and just doesn't really work properly. The intrigue set up by the game is, intriguing, but let down by how slow, ploddy, and generally underwhelming a lot of the explanations really are. It's very much a mid-experience all around, and now that we're at the end, that's really all I've got to conclude with. There's nothing to add, no final we should consider or no last, I just want to be clear setups that make me want to have you see the game from a certain light. I do worry that I was a little harsher than I initially wanted to be, but I also don't feel much of a drive to alleviate that. Atomfall cost me about 50 quid, and I'd say it's closer to a 25 quid experience. Not dreadful, just really not all that impressive either. It was a game that I had my eye on for a while because I saw people making a British Fallout comparison on the lead up to its launch, is what that sentence was supposed to be. But now that we're at the end, we can ask, is it really a fair comparison having gone through the whole thing? And I'd say no. Atomfall doesn't feel like British Fallout, it feels like Atomfall. For all its flaws, at least I didn't ever feel like I was playing a different game. It's definitely its own thing, so there's that. That is definitely a positive trait. Granted, that's largely because it's nowhere near as deep or interesting enough to warrant such a comparison, and it didn't even crash, not once. What the hell? That's not a Fallout game. Come to think of it, I can't actually remember who was making those comparisons. It was either a YouTube person or some members of my own family who are into video games. It could be either, and I can't be bothered to double check at this point. Atomfall is alright. That's the end result of my examination. Do I recommend it? I don't know. Maybe. I'd say wait for it to go on sale if you can. 50 quid is a bit of a hard sell for this type of game, but it's still not the worst video game I've played this year, so it's got that going for it. It's fine, it's okay. I could see it being someone's new favourite toy. I could also see someone wanting to yeet it out of a window. I swear these are the worst games to talk about because I can't end the video on a super positive, upbeat note, and I also can't end it in an overly spiteful, contempt-fueled manner. Atomfall is a game that exists, and exist it certainly does. Thanks for watching, my dears. As always, I can't effectively express my gratitude enough for you taking time out of your day to be here and listen to my rambling nonsense. You're all the best. Thanks so much. Until we meet again, my loves, take care, drink water, do a stretch, pet a dog or a cat or whatever non-biting human creature you have in your vicinity, and we'll see you next time.